on Tuesday evening, we're friends, obviously, with Pete Fiutak. We feature him as often as we possibly can. We always respect his football knowledge. That's why we bring him on. We're going to bring him on here in about 30 seconds. Russ Mitchell's a guy that we feature every week. College football news. So we have all this Alabama fatigue syndrome. Tuesday night, after Alabama was the number one team, I found a tweet that I've got to ask Pete, see if he is guilty party. If anyone but a team named Alabama with this resume and the way it played versus Texas A&M and Mississippi State, it's not the college football playoff number one team right now. Pete Fiutak, are you guilty as charged? Was this you?
It's not an Alabama fatigue thing. It's sort of the wrong way to put it, because I love it when Alabama is awesome. It's a breathtaking, amazing thing to watch. But I'll return the question on you. Does this look like the team of the last few years? It's a good team, obviously, but this doesn't look like a killer. It hasn't really beaten anybody who's all that great, and it struggled against two Texas A&M and Mississippi State teams. Again, that's not to say that it's not great, but if you're looking at the resume and you're looking at the bodies of work, there's actually no argument. Now, first of all, I don't think Miami's that great, but there's actually no argument technically to put Alabama over Miami, who just rimrocked the number 3 CFP team, because Alabama just doesn't have a win like that yet, and it's been just okay against the pretty decent teams that it's had to face so far.
Yeah, but Miami, I get it, but Notre Dame was up there because their name. That's why.
It doesn't matter. No, they weren't there because of their name. They had their resume. They blew out NC State, blew out Michigan State, blew out USC, blew out Boston College. But Notre Dame's resume was fantastic. So however way you want to put it, that was the third-ranked team in the country. So technically, no matter how many ways you want to shake it, that was the number 3 team that just got destroyed by Miami. Now, again, I don't think Miami's that great. I think they're going to have problems with Virginia. I think they could have problems with Pitt if it's cold out. I don't think this is that great a team. But technically, again, I don't know how you can look at resumes. So I guess it's more of a process thing than an Alabama thing. Because basically what's happening is the College Football Playoff Committee put Alabama number 1 because they're like, it's Alabama, as opposed to being, yes, we think this team is great because of this. There's no real explanation for that. That and the fact they put Clemson number 2, kind of a rough week for the playoff committee.
But it looks like it's going to be a really difficult year for the committee. If everything shakes out, they're going to have to make some difficult decisions, unlike the previous 3 years that was pretty automatic.
Maybe not. I'm really. It has nothing to do with Alabama. I just think it would be a whole lot of fun if there was new blood in the mix this year. Because we've had the same old teams. But
see, you even say it right there. You want something different. You're suffering from Alabama fatigue, Pete.
I'm not suffering from Alabama fatigue. I'm just saying it would be fun to have. If you had Georgia, imagine the energy that would be in the stadiums and for the college football playoff. If you had Georgia, Miami, Wisconsin, and let's say TCU, 4 brand new teams in this. But what's going to happen? You know how this is all going to shake out in the end. We're going to have Alabama, we're going to have Clemson, we're going to have Oklahoma, and we're going to have Ohio State.
You're right.
We're going to have the 4 teams that are always there every single year. But I'm just saying, I think it would be, it's nothing to do with Alabama fatigue. I think, again, I am a big fan of college football teams playing great. I have been a fan of what Nick Saban has done and everything Alabama's done. This team, though, but you see these guys, this is not the killer of the last several years.
It's not a typical Nick Saban defense. Defensively, offensive line's not very dominant.
Defense is fine. Offense, it's like you see. I know you won't want to say it because of the fan base and everything, but this team isn't it. Last team was better. That last year's team was the one. Even a couple of teams before that. This team can certainly get to the national championship, and they can absolutely win it. But it's gonna need a couple breaks along the way.
Pete, you don't feel sorry for us, all of our injuries down here? No?
Exactly.
You don't feel sorry for us?
Well, that's starting to become the argument, because the ones that, Alabama being number, there's no argument really against, again, I'm not going to fight hard on the idea that, Alabama being number 1. Of course, it's Alabama. If everyone had to bet the house on something, they'd probably take the Crimson Tide. But the problem is, again, the process, because what I want, the process for the College Football Playoff Committee, because what I don't want is for the committee to say, well, we're going to pick this team because we think it's good. Because once they start doing that, they screw up. Because the problem now, the bigger problem is when you talk about injuries, is they're giving way too much respect to Clemson for that Kelly Bryant injury that he was hurt against Syracuse. Because you heard Kirby Holcutt say, well, their quarterback was hurt. Syracuse isn't going to go bowling. That's a bad loss. Everyone's got massive injuries. Wisconsin doesn't have its number one receiver anymore. It's missing 4 key starters off that defense, and it just handed Iowa a historically bad loss. Everybody's got injuries across the board, and you just have to deal. But fortunately, if you're Alabama, your next guy up is probably just as good, if not better, than the guy you just lost.
And Pete, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but they lost another 5-star yesterday in practice, broke his foot. So he's going to be out for a few weeks. LeBron Ray, which is a backup defensive lineman, but he was the number 1 player last year in this state. So it just continues. Maybe it's not Alabama's year. Maybe this is not. But looking at the rest of college football, Pete, I don't see a dominant team out there.
There isn't one. And the whole goal in this whole thing, and from Urban Meyer, Nick Saban, all the guys who are every year going into the season thinking college football playoff or bust. What they keep saying, just get in there. Just get in the Final Four. If you can find your way in, there's no pattern. No one's got it. No one's got it figured out. Everything, but if you can just get there, then you at least got your shot at the right thing happening on the right day. Sometimes you're just going to get destroyed, like Ohio State did against Clemson last year, and sometimes everything's going to break right, like it did when you had Zeke Elliott running wild in the Sugar Bowl. So you just got to get to those 4. And like you said, if it's not Alabama, there's not one team out there that's just crushing everyone, except for we still don't quite know what Miami, if they can keep this going, because everything's feeding off their secondary that's picking off 4 passes a game, which is being ridiculous. And I'm really curious to see Wisconsin versus Michigan. I know the Badgers have played next to nobody, but now the resume is starting to look a little bit better. Northwestern's starting to rise up and be okay overall. Iowa, certainly what they did to Ohio State's been pretty good. Even a dumb game like Florida Atlantic. I mean, Florida Atlantic's going to win the Conference USA title. So again, that's not beating the killers on the schedule, but this might be a case of a great team, bad schedule. And if Wisconsin's really the real deal, it should just blow out Michigan tomorrow without a problem.
All right, Pete, you've been inside that room. You've went through these mock selections. How is the committee getting Alabama at number 1 and Clemson number 2? What are they doing? Because you can help us understand what's happening behind the scenes. How are they coming to this conclusion?
I honestly don't know why they're picking Clemson over Oklahoma. And they had to have argued. What they do is you argue each point, and you're arguing each step along the way. Okay, we're going to argue Oklahoma versus Wisconsin versus Auburn versus Clemson, for this number 4 spot or for 3 spot, or whatever they're going to put each team into the spot. And if you're looking at the resumes, I don't know how they could look at the body of work of Oklahoma and the body of work of Clemson and say, okay, yeah, the Iowa State loss stinks, but Iowa State's pretty good. They beat TCU. They're going to go bowling. That's a dangerous team. And they beat Oklahoma State on the road. And they're missing a whole bunch of things for Clemson based on wins on the road and, wins over top teams. But, yeah, okay, they beat Auburn. That's the one. I get that argument, at least at the moment. But overall, Oklahoma's got a better body of work than Clemson. But what the committee's doing, and here's the dangerous part, is because the one thing we don't want is for this whole thing to be based on judging. Just like saying, okay, well, I think these guys are good, so we're going to put them in. And that's basically what they're doing. They're basically saying, well, we don't think this Oklahoma defense is that great, or we think this, and then all of a sudden they're making judgment calls instead of looking at the hard data and the resumes.
Pete, we're looking ahead at the Auburn Tigers. I'm sorry, but we don't show respect like Nick Saban teaches us to have for the Mercer Bears tomorrow. Let me ask you, if you look ahead of the Iron Bowl, the Alabama and Auburn matchup, what do you see?
A dangerous team that's rising up at the right time. I mean, obviously Auburn's playing with a whole bunch of confidence. I mean, Georgia's a whole lot better than it showed last week. And if Alabama's playing like it played against Texas A&M and LSU and Mississippi State, it's going to get tagged. I mean, the offense at some point is going to have to rise up and rock, unless this becomes one of those games where Alabama's defense just takes over and ends it. And just like, all right, Kerryon Johnson's not doing anything. We're going to stuff this thing. Jarrett Stidham, all right, he's going to be okay, but we're not going to let him throw for 300 yards, certainly. And you just sort of go through. I mean, sometimes, for the same reasons I praise Wisconsin, is the same reason I guess I'm dogging Alabama, is that sometimes you just do what you're supposed to do. You play, you have a great defense. Don't turn the ball over. Rely on the running game. Expect Jalen Hurts to take off once in a while and make a big play here and there, and just assume that your defense is going to get the job done. So it can't get into the last thing it wants to do is get into a firefight or a shootout with Auburn, but that's going to be one charged up environment, one crazy part. And then the other part of this, which is going to be the real fun, depending on who else wins, is I'm sorry to bring this up for you, but what happens if Alabama loses? At 11-1, does it pull in Ohio State and still possibly get into the college football playoff if it loses a close, tight game to Auburn? That's going to be probably if that happens, that will end up being the College Football Playoff Committee's biggest judgment call.
All right, so let me put you, and I know I'm running out of time here. Ohio State wins out. They win the Big Ten. Alabama loses next week to Auburn, and they're sitting here non-conference champ, 11-1. Yep. Who would you put in?
Me personally, I would put in Ohio State.
I knew you would.
I would have put in Penn State last year over Ohio State. I'm a firm believer in if you can't even win your division, if you can't even win your conference, you don't belong in the college football playoff. So it's more of it has nothing to do with Alabama. It has more to do with everything to do with what I think the process of this thing should be, and there needs to be some sort of criteria. I hated that Penn State got left out of this thing last year. I was fine with Washington getting in. Okay, you're a Power 5 conference champ. I'm good with that. But I would put Ohio State in over Alabama. And that's the one team, by the way, if you're Alabama, you ask who's the best team right now, I know what they do. If they're flaky, they're weird, but that is the one team that if you're Alabama, you don't want anywhere close to this college football playoff, because if their head's screwed on straight and they show up like they did against Michigan State, that might be the best team in the country on that day, no matter what anybody else does. But again, they're so flaky that they don't deserve to be in the college football playoff right now. But again, if you're Ohio State, you'd much rather see Wisconsin, Miami, and let's say Oklahoma, and have Ohio State go off to like some other bowl, big bowl game somewhere else.
But why don't you, Pete, go after Urban Meyer, because he's got, as you talked about, a very talented football team, and he's got absolutely kicked in the teeth by two different teams.
Oh, and not only that, and if you look at the last 11 games, they've lost 3 of their last 11 games in utter destructive double-digit blowouts. And I wrote the article on this. I mean, look at the Nick Saban era, where I think there was 4, maybe 5 double-digit losses in his era, and all of them were like in 1 year or something. There's something crazy about it, but. I'm going after. I agree. I don't think Ohio State deserves to be in. I'm not going after anybody, but I'm just saying, in terms of on the field, in terms of talent, in terms of teams you don't want to play, that is the one team that again you don't want that could rise up and beat anybody in the country on the right day.
Pete Fiutak, he is the guy that puts it all together. CollegeFootballNews.com. CollegeFootballNews.com. He's got a lot of great content there. CollegeFootballNews.com. Pete, have a great Thanksgiving, even though you hate Alabama.
I do hate Alabama. I'm tired of them. I'm just kidding. Of course I do. Come on. Yeah, you all make these fans mad at me now.
Thanks, Pete. Have a good one, man.
All right.